Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I'm going to take on a reel that I actually like. It's about the 2000s. It's a Shakespeare. It's a Tidewater 10 line counter. And this one, it's got a nice narrow profile for the fishing. It holds a lot of line. It's got a 3.8 gear ratio. It was around in the 2000s, up to maybe 2007 or 8 or 9 or so. Interestingly enough, the internals of this reel seem to be shared with Okuma. And Okuma is not a Shakespeare company, right? Shakespeare is part of Pure Fishing. Okuma stands alone. But internally, the designs are near identical. So I always find that pretty interesting. So let me take this apart. We'll show you how it was made, how to service it. This one's been sitting in storage for some time. You can tell there's an awful lot of just plain dust and the like, which is certainly not something that accumulates out on the boat or that. But if you can get by that dust and dirt, and we'll clean that up, you're going to find that this is a very nice and dependable and reliable reel. I think that the one that this lines up with on Okuma is the Okuma Classic, and they just it's amazing that I believe you can actually switch the parts inside of it, although I've never tried. It's that close. So I'm going to start by taking off the handle cap nut and the retainer and the screw. We'll do a full disassembly with the exception of the line counter. If you're servicing a line counter reel, you do not need to take the line counter off. And it's just a little piston driven piece, and generally speaking it does not need any services to it, but it's a little plastic piece normally. But we'll take a look at it. If it does need to be removed, we'll certainly do that, but don't complicate your life. And not only with the line counter, but on spinning reels, too many times I see people take the bail arms off and then kind of get lost with the springs, and well, you don't need to do that during a normal service if your bail is working okay. Here's one of the reasons I like the reel. It's got 2 ball bearings in it. It's a nice substantial reel. Some of these Tidewaters you'll find just have the bushing. You'll see the bushing underneath, and this is a good time to tell you, if you're not familiar with working on the reel, go get the reel schematic, and more importantly, take pictures along the way. The idea with the pictures is that if you get stuck, you'll be able to go back and take a look on your cell phone, your video camera, your digital camera, whatever you took the pictures on. You'll be able to go back and take a look and see what the orientation was, what the sequence was that you took them out in, and how to go put them back together. Now this is always interesting to me because I believe these side plate screws are different. So pay attention as you take them out so that you can put them in the proper order. That's why I'm laying these on my desk here, just to make sure. So as you can see, what actually doesn't seem to make sense is you have a crossbar here and it's got the short screw, no crossbar, and it's got the long screw. So just make a mental note of that when you go to reinstall. Long screws go to the back ones, and shorter screws, well, at least in one case, the shorter screw goes to the top of the reel. So let's see, we have 2 crossbars on here. Let's see if the pattern holds. We should have 3 long screws. We do, and I'm guessing this will be a short screw as well. I'm reading the case here. The case says it handles 320 yards of 15-pound line. So a narrow frame reel that can hold that kind of line is a nice compact design. It's good for well, it's good for ocean fishing, some trolling. That's the idea behind the line counter. If you're drifting baits, you want to know how far out you've gone. This measures in feet, and you want to know how far out you've gone so that when you do get a hit, you can go right back into that zone again, and hopefully that will put you right on the fish without too much worry. All right, this should be ready to just remove now. We've taken the 5 screws out. We'll take that spool out, And you can see underneath there's not much going on here. There's a spool, I guess that's a bushing back there, so I'm thinking we only have the one bearing in this one. We've got some grease on those pieces and parts. We'll come over and take this side plate off, and we'll go back and just clean that out when we get done with the gear side service. So this is what I mean by looks the same. There's some minor differences with this reel, but not enough that it makes a big difference here. So the first thing you want to notice is you got a C-clip here that doesn't need to be removed. That's just holding a bushing in. We have 3 screws that are holding it to the case, and we have 1 screw that's holding it to the main gear. And you need to remove all of those screws. This is a good place to take that picture. As you start to remove these, you'll notice that the main screw that I'm removing now belongs to the main gear. And when you go to reinstall, you're going to need to make sure that this one lines up and goes in pretty quickly. And then you have this little cup, so make sure you know the orientation of that. And I like to take those pieces and parts, put them into a parts tray. My parts tray is the bottom of a fast food container at the moment. I've been known to use bottoms of milk jugs and other things. I just want to keep those pieces and parts in view, and I also want to keep them together so that when I go to reinstall, I will be able to find those pieces and parts rather than leaving them on my desk, only to find out that they've gone somewhere. Alright, there's 3 of these short screws. They're the same. You see up top here that the bushing came out. This one was on top of the bushing, and we have 2 tension washers that were under the bushing. Sometimes that's hard to tell when you do something like I just did here, where I tilted the reel, but that's where a schematic will help you, in that if you don't know where they came from, look at the schematic, it'll tell you. That's the top of your bridge plate now, and you can see underneath how this works. So we have a jack, we have the yoke with the pinion gear, we have the anti-reverse dog. This anti-reverse dog sits, that's a pivot point in there, it sits in a cavity. We have the screw coming off of that. Here's your pinion gear or gear sleeve and your main gear. So all this needs in terms of a workaround is just a little bit of cleanup, and we'll do that now. We're going to continue to remove the pieces and parts and put them into the tray. To remove the jack, you need to remove the screw. It's a small screw, so use a micro driver to get at that screw. You can see it coming out here. And I'm holding my hand on that. I don't want anything to fly that can get lost in the process. So I'll take that off. And then you'll see not only did the jack come out, but the yoke and the pinion gear came out. And then underneath that we have the 2 springs for the yoke. Then we have this as a pivot for that anti-reverse dog, so I'm going to pull that out. And you can leave it attached if it doesn't seem to get in the way. If it does, or if you're kind of nervous about losing that spring, you can do 2 things. You can leave it on the post and just kind of move this out of the way, and remove it and put it in your parts tray, which is what I prefer to do. This is your main gear assembly now, so we're going to pull that rest of the assembly out because we have a lot of old and dried grease in the case. You can see it there. It's a whole bunch of grease that's just accumulated on the side. And for cleaning the grease, I always like to start with something that's non-abrasive, in this case a paper towel, and I'm sure Chris is looking at that paper towel and telling me that it's past its useful life, so we'll go ahead and change that out. And if you need to dissolve this grease, if it's not coming out easy, if it's just kind of been worn into that channel, then go ahead and use a penetrating oil to do that. In this case, all of that just cleaned right up. Notice how your gear is set up here. I've seen these installed backwards. You have a little metal washer and a drag washer on the back side of this. Then you have the main, and then you have your gear shaft. Well, in that main, you have the rest of your washers, and these are hard washers. You don't need to do anything with these other than to make sure that they're clean. So I'm going to grab a small screwdriver just to lift all of those out. Okay, let's rebuild that drag stack then. We're going to take an eared washer first. That'll anchor the reel at the bottom. The thin black one. The round keyed washer. First of the red ones. The second eared washer. The red washer and then the keyed washer. And remember how this goes. This goes to the stack this way. As I said, I've seen it a lot of times where somebody has put them on backwards. And that's pretty understandable, but that's not the way it goes. It'll work either way. It's just this is the way it comes from the factory. All right, then you have another washer and another keyed washer on the back end of this. So that's your drag stack. Get your grease. Go ahead and put some grease onto the gear. And I use Penn Precision Reel Grease for this. I'm not partial to any manufacturer's reel grease, but I am partial that you use a fishing reel grease when you are doing your reel. We'll do the same thing with the yoke now. We'll get some grease on that. And do that on the pinion gear as well. Check those teeth. Make sure that those teeth are aligned and that there's no chips or broken pieces or parts to it. All right, that's your yoke. Next up then, grab your case and your yoke springs. Those go on the post here. Then the yoke goes in. That slot faces out, so it faces towards you. Okay, once you install the yoke, go ahead and grab your main gear now and place that inside the assembly. And this is good to work that down at this point. Push down on your yoke assembly, take your jack, find the stud, and then that little screw that holds that down. And those of you that watch the channel know me and this little screw. Gonna have fun, so maybe it's time for you to go get the cup of coffee, but in this case it actually looks like I'm gonna do okay. All right, that's your assembly for the jack, the yoke, and the main gear. Next up then is the anti-reverse dog and assembly. The dog goes in this direction. If you had a question about that, you would come back and you would look at the pictures you took. And then you need to take the dog and line that hole up where the stud is going to go. There's a back end of that hole down that goes in next. And that fits in the cavity. Like that. So this is your anti-reverse dog, and now you need to set that spring onto the post. Bring it over the top and get it set just like that. That's your anti-reverse dog, spring, and main assembly. So now you got a couple of things you need to do here to complete this back side, and the most important one now is to put that bridge plate on. So I like to hold this in because that has a tendency to move. take the plate and then set it into the 3 spots, and this post on the anti-reverse dog goes in that hole. So just slip the pinion gear a little bit, we'll get that back. Line the 2 pieces up on the one side, line all the other pieces up. Then is to put the collar onto the main gear. Make sure that that gets seated into the stack. Okay, so we're just going to put the main gear screw in. And we'll put the other 3 in, and that'll hold the bridge down. So as a quick reminder, what we did was we set the main gear in, we put the jack in, we completed the install of the spring for the anti-reverse dog. We tightened everything down. I came around to the front. I'm not sure if I did that on the video or not. I came around to the front and I put the 2 tension washers and the bushing in on the front end of the case. And we made sure everything was aligned properly so that we could tighten this down. So let's give this a try now. Everything should be tight. I should be able to release. And there we go, we've got everything working properly. Okay, on the front end of that we had the bushing. Okay, the bushing is in, bearing shield is in, bearing is in, secondary bearing washer goes in, and then our adjuster goes on. So that's your gear side of this reel. Turns nice and easily. We're going to reinstall this, then we'll come over to the other side and clean that up. So while you have this off, it's always a good idea to clean up the metalwork, particularly on something like this where, well, it's been sitting for a while collecting a lot of dust, dirt, and debris and the like. So I use a rod and reel cleaner. I'm using Penn's Precision Rod and Reel Cleaner. And we'll just go ahead and do a little work on both sides. I use a kitchen scrubby. It's not very abrasive and it does tend to clean up all the dirty spots. If you have a hard to reach place, go ahead and use like a cotton swab or something to get that little dirt and debris off of that. And then we can turn our attention to the other side. There's a little tag end of the monofilament that was on this line, so when I see if I can't cut that off at this point, I'll just use a utility knife to try and break that nut. There we go. And you can do the same thing here. You can clean up the spool. Get it off the dust and the dirt. That's important, particularly if you're going to intend to resell a reel. You want to make it look as nice as you can for the potential buyer. It really doesn't take a lot more effort to do it. Okay, we'll put the spool back in. And normally I would grease the other side of that spool, but we're going to come over to that side in order to complete the install, so we're going to leave that right now. Let's put some onto the shaft of the spool. We're going to get that in and lined up properly. And there's the 2 holes that mount for that. And remember what we did. The long screws are the ones that go far into the case. And the short screws are the ones that reside where that crosswind arm is. I like to go on an alternating pattern. So I'll do the one on the one side, come up and do a crosswind block on the other. I want to keep equal torsion or tension on that side plate. I don't want to warp or have it bow by going in a circular manner and finding out that something is off in doing that. Okay, so now I'll grab a long one, go down here. And I'm trying a new camera angle, so if for some reason my hand is still getting in the way, and my apologies. They told me to try a head-on kind of a shot. Well, the only problem with that is it's kind of unnatural to be working away from you rather than towards you, which is what I'm accustomed to, but well, we're trying to make those changes. All right, one more screw. It's hiding under the free spool release lever. And then we'll give it a test right there. And if all is good, we'll go over to the other side, clean that up, service the pawl, and kind of move on. But as I mentioned, overall, I like this reel a lot. Okay, we have one hiding under here. And there's nothing left in there but the handle tie-down mechanisms. Always good to check your parts tray. If you've got stuff still in there, well, go back and check. So right now we're operating beautifully. We want to make sure that we trip on that free spool. We do. So let's go over now. We'll just take care of the other side of this equation. Now before we do that, I guess we can put the rest of the handle side on, get those parts out of my tray. Makes it easier to figure out where it is. There's a tension washer that resides between the handle and the star adjuster. Next up is that cap to hold the handle down. That's a 10mm cap. We'll use a 10mm wrench. And as you tighten this nut cap down, generally speaking, if you have the point of the nut cap facing that hole, or you have a 90° with the flat side, generally speaking, this will line up so that you don't have to play around too much with trying to get that tie-down screw to match up with it. All right, that's in. Now I'll go over the other side. So I do repair reels by mail. If you are interested in a repair service, if you send me an email to the information on the business card that's attached, I will be happy to provide you with reel repair information. So we're doing the same thing on this side that we did on the other side. We're just checking to note the lengths of the screws. And I do think the same thing is going to happen here. We're going to find ourselves with the short screws for the crossbars and the long screws for the remaining part of the case. And this one has a couple more screws on this side because it has screws that are holding that reel seat in. So it'll be good to just group those together. Got one hiding in here. Let's see if we can't get that one out. I'm just going to leave that one nestled in there. And then we'll see if this one's two unique ones or if there's something different about these. These are the ones for the reel seat. And they go in quite a bit. So if you can't get them out, don't worry terribly about them. When you pull the case off, you'll be able to poke them out, just like we're doing here. And the two for the bottom are longer screws. And again, I'm just going to leave the other one right there. Here's a case where I am going to use penetrating oil as a cleaner. It's just got some old grease accumulated on the idler gear. And you want to take the time to remove this case because you want to check the teeth on that idler gear. If there is a weak spot on this reel, it is going to be this idler gear, which is going to drive your worm gear. So you want to pay attention to that. Okay, this is clean enough. We've checked everything. We're going to put a little bit of grease into that bushing on this side. You don't need to grease the idler gear. And now we can just go ahead and go back and reinstall. If you needed to remove this worm gear for any particular reason, this is the clip that holds it in. it kind of butterflies out, kind of comes out like this, and you pull it out and away from the groove, and you can remove that worm gear if that's a problem. All right, let's just go ahead and put this back together then. You want to align the two big holes, and you want to turn to make sure that you've meshed the different side plates. You want to make sure that the worm gear drives, that the spool is interfacing with the idler gear, and that your line counter is working. As I mentioned at the start of this, you do not need to service the line counter. All right, I'm doing the same thing here I did with the other side plate, kind of alternating to keep equal pressure on the reel as I go to tighten all of these up. These were the two that came out of the bottom, and those are the same length as the other case screws. I'm going to put those two in next. Now I didn't take the one that came out of that deep recess out, so I just need to tighten that one up so it doesn't fall out when you're out on the boat or from the pier or from the banks. These reels can be used for trolling, they can be used for drop fishing, they can be used for live lining, which again, that's one of the advantages of that line counter, is you can see how far out the strikes are occurring and go right back to that spot. When I first was starting fishing a long time ago, one of the old pros taught me, pull the line out and count the number of line pulls that you're making. So as you're letting line out, it'd be 1, 2, 3, and so on. And that would be every 2 or 3 feet that you would pull line off as you would drifting the baits or the live ones. And then by default, if you got a strike, you'd say, okay, that was at, say, 16 poles or 25 poles or whatever it was, and you knew right away when you went to rebait, just go out 16 or 18 before you would expect any action, because that's where you would be in the water column searching them down. All right, there you go. So we're going to check to make sure that the line guide is working. I'm going to go to free spool for that. I'm going to trip this, and that'll start counting your numbers. You can see it here, counting the numbers. Then we're going to trip this back and make sure that it's rewinding, and that's what it's doing there. And then make sure that the reset works. It does. Got a nice functioning Shakespeare 15W line counter. This is a very nice reel, well made. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation on how to service it and how to keep it running for years to come. The only thing left that you would do, well, you'd service the pawl. This one's working fine. You can put a little bit of oil. I oil pawls. I don't grease them. I'll grab a screwdriver here and just take the pawl cover off. Put a little bit of oil inside the case. Now, if you were noticing that it was running rough, that it was stopping on one side or another, if there appeared to be a lot of grease on the worm gear or dirt or that, then go pull the pawl out and do a more thorough service. But right now, that's not needed. Okay, there it is. The Shakespeare Tidewater 10 LCL line counter level wind. And very nice reel, well priced, well positioned, well made. So I hope you've enjoyed that. So to everybody who's a first responder and essential personnel, thank you for all you're doing during this pandemic to keep us safe and your dedication to task. To everybody, please stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.